Hi everybody, I just finished a manga one-shot and I thought it might be an interesting idea to go over and analyze this script to see if there's anything we can learn from it. I don't really know how this video will come out, but I think it might have some potential to have some educational value to it. On top of that, a small YouTuber called No Name Weeb is also hosting a competition right now. Essentially, the idea behind the competition is to see which anime YouTuber would be able to write the best anime, but the competition is also open to just pretty much whoever wants to enter it. So I'm just going to pop this story into that contest as well, and if anyone's interested, you can head over to the channel. You can probably see the results. They're going to be up in like a week since this video is posted, and if you missed this competition, you can probably go bother them and see if they'll put together another competition sometime. With that said, let's get into the script. First things first, title introduction, Scrapyard Rising. That should become pretty self-evident why it's called that as we go on. Now, the synopsis, this is something I actually started doing recently. Essentially, I need a way to get the story idea over to a potential artist in a really quick, efficient manner. And a synopsis is actually a really good way to do this. This is essentially basically a rough outline of the entirety of the one-shot, so an artist can immediately look at it and understand if it's going to be their thing or not. And for this story specifically, it actually comes in handy even in the first sentence, because you see it's about automatons, which is something that traditionally is harder for newer artists to be able to draw. So if someone sees this, they can say, okay, this story's not for me, and can go check out another story in my portfolio and maybe pick a different story to draw from. So synopsis, very good for getting your story across in a quick way so an artist knows whether or not they actually want to pick it up or not. Now, because why not, I'm going to read the synopsis out here. A retired boxer, Courneya, is disheveled from the world changing to a new style competitive fighting, in the form of piloted automatons. One day, he discovers a certain fighter, named Pablo, in an underground ring. Pablo's fighting ignites something in this old fighter, and Courneya tries to become his new coach. Pablo doesn't care for the offer, since he thinks he's a shoo-in to get a sponsorship at the exposition he is heading to. There, Pablo, while controlling an automaton, takes things too far during his sparring. This causes an already established fighter to take Pablo down. During the course of this fight, the sponsor's property is destroyed, and they expect Pablo to pay for the damages. Being from the slums, he has no way to pay such a steep price, unless he uses his skills to win prize money from an upcoming automaton tournament. Courneya reappears in front of the young man to try and get them to work together. Pablo, irritated from earlier, attempts to punch the man. Pablo then gets punched out, and Courneya simply asks, "Is that all you've got?" Pablo gets back up and proceeds to get beaten down over and over, until sunset. Courneya explains his dream of showing the world the raw, visceral emotion that had been lost when they switched over to this new sport, to prove that the old way can stand at the top of the world once again. Pablo, hearing this, decides to accept the offer, and the two aim to climb out of the slums together. General synopsis of it, pretty clear. I think most people probably get what the story's going to be about from this point forward. Maybe it could be good to add like genre tags in here or something. That might actually be a smart idea. This is clearly going to be a more serious sports series, with a mix focused on the characters, the actual fights that go on, and also the technology in this world. Moving on, we get to the actual outline of the one-shot. Page 1's pretty simple. Most first pages in one-shots are generally going to follow pretty similar type of things. There's probably going to be an established shot that transitions into a character shot that transitions to like either exploring either characters, the world, or something about the story, right? Because you have to have something to latch onto at the very beginning, and so you have to set that thing up in some motion. Originally, I didn't actually start with the first panel here, where two automatons exchange blows. Instead, it started with the second panel here, but I decided that it was very important to actually establish that the story is about automatons and establish that this is the kind of main focal point in how the fights will actually be taking place, especially since it's not clear right away that that's necessarily going to be where the story is going. So having this as the first opener shot both works as an extra piece of action and also establishes the story in a better way than just starting here. Transition into it being a monitor screen, drunkard at the bar, ooh, very sad, but he's at a fighting ring, and that can say something about the character, obviously. Over the course of the next couple pages, he sees the main character fight. He sees that the main character is relatively wild in the ring, and something ignites in the old man, and he's like, yes, that lad, I like him, I need him. We have the first interaction between the main characters. We kind of get a little bit of both their personalities, a little bit of foreshadowing of what both of them want going forward, and a little bit of understanding of what drives the characters here. Here we kind of see the main character is relatively selfish and more self-centered in his own approach, and we see that Courneya is in his own way still selfish because he has his own goals he's working towards, but he's working towards those goals through someone else. So we see both of the characters at the start of the series have this kind of selfish satisfaction going in what they're aiming at for the story. More character introductions eventually goes into the characters going into the actual sparring arena. We go a little bit more in depth on what the technology is and how it works exactly. We show the differences between someone who might have a little bit more experience, someone who doesn't have experience, someone who has not stepped into this actual system before isn't actually able to fully control them properly yet. And that contrasts with the main character stepping out and being able to control them properly. And that either shows A, they had experience doing this before, or B, they just are naturally talented at this specific nuance. Not to say that's even very impressive, because of the fact you can easily step into like a VR game and be able to figure it out, and this works in a very similar manner, so you can do it for the first time, and that's not necessarily like a big deal, like, oh, prodigy, but it does show something to do with the character. It shows that he probably has a little bit of a more natural knack at picking things up that other characters might not have. From here, we transition into the rival fight. We establish that Pablo is essentially the opposite of mild-mannered. This is the start of the actual automaton fight between the rival and the main character, and in this fight, Pablo flashes back to the conversation he had with Courneya, and he realizes that, oh, yeah, the things this old guy was saying kind of hold true, and if I do some of them, I might actually be able to win this fight. Or at least, he thinks he might have a shot at winning the fight. The rest of this goes pretty naturally. Fight occurs, the rivals meet. There's a setup of the fact Pablo's going to have to actually, like, pay some money because he did a bunch of damaging things, oh no. And eventually it transitions back into Pablo and Courneya talking once again. There's transition to Pablo-Courneya fight, which shows Pablo both that this old man, well, he already learned that this old man probably knows what he's talking about, but this also shows that he can back up what he's talking about with his actual physical capabilities as well. This is in addition to the story that I didn't have in the initial script, because the initial script I was really aiming for exactly 30 pages, but then I was like, I can probably push it a little bit further there if I get a little bit more characterization in, which is essentially just establishing that Pablo suffered from some child abuse things in his past, and that might be part of what's lending to him being the type of character that he is, where he doesn't necessarily accept other people in, and the fact that he clearly has some type of I don't want to say like rage inside of him. I'm gonna say rage inside of him. Big explanation of the dreams that the characters have, why Courneya is interested in Pablo, and also eventually culminating together in a big old deciding to work together as a team and aim to get out of the slums together. Very good, very story, very like whoosh, wah, hoo, ha, ho. To actually break this down further, this scripting style is obviously what would be called a low detail script as compared to a high detail script, which essentially in the most like straightforward, noticeable terms means that a panel's description is essentially going to be a sentence instead of a paragraph. When you start getting to panels being more than a paragraph, you're probably better off just going to longhand. Some people might not like doing longhand. Some people might not like drawing from longhand. I assume most people prefer to not draw from longhand, but there are a handful of artists that do actually just prefer to only draw off of longhand. And that's something to keep in mind. You have to actually be able to do all three scripting styles good, but this is definitely a style I much prefer, where it's just one sentence per panel, where there's room for the artist to interpret things and to like add their own flair to the story, but also it kind of like allows for you to use more flavorful words, right? Words that can be interpreted in multiple different ways, and you can kind of like have the ideas bounce off against the artist and see if they interpret it in a separate way. And if they do, they might be able to bring back something more dynamic or interesting than what you were thinking of initially. Also, it's just like, it's quicker, this style. This style is a lot quicker than a detailed one because there's just less writing to it, basically. Now, it takes me an hour to do 20 pages of a low detail style. It takes me 2 hours to do high detail, and takes me between 2 to 3 hours, maybe sometimes even a little bit more, to do a longhand style, depending on various different factors. But of course, longhand style is more so a chapter rather than 20 pages, because pages in longhand is very different than pages in strip style. Pages in strip style is actually just every page is a different page, right? Whereas longhand, it could be 70 pages, it could be 20 pages, it has to do with like formatting and other things. Now, there's different ways to take this style of one-shot. You can focus more on the rivalry. You can focus more on the main two characters. You can even like cut around things and like somehow transition the third main character in here earlier on and figure out how to work them into the story, because the third main character is also very important to the story, which is essentially, I think, was the character's name Dixit? I can check. Yes, other character's named Dixit. Dixit actually important to the story because of the fact he's the actual mechanic of the team, but also he adds a sort of soul to the series that I think is very important. And so the next chapter that actually introduces Dixit, I feel it's important to actually fully establish what the story is about and how it's going to go about falling into its identity, right? Like there's a little bit of the themes coming through in the story of this like idea of rising up from nothing, of literally not having a robot, not having a coach, not even really having like a real fighter, and like coming up from that, coming up from the absolute nothingness and rising up to the point to reach your goals, right? And so those themes are somewhat on display. So the fact that it's not directly expressed fully, it's not like, oh, we don't have a robot, what are we gonna do? Like that's not a question in the first chapter because it doesn't really need to be a question in the first chapter, right? And a few people like have looked over the script and they've added comments that aren't necessarily accurate, but I can see where like certain people that have a little less experience don't really know what to cut or what to add to certain scripts, right? Like, is it a good idea to show the fight between Courneya and Pablo? In my opinion, no, that's not important in the slightest. And in fact, I think it retracts from what's happening. It's just about that instantly getting back up. And so seeing him get up once and be knocked down, that's what's important. The fight itself is not important. It's just the thematic layer and the character layer of the fight. Whereas the fight between Pablo and the rival is important because it's about the fight. It's about showing off how automatons battle. It's about showing off the fighting styles of the two characters. It's about showing the personality of the characters through the fight itself. And expressing that in the fight is important. If you cut down this fight, you lose a little bit of that, right? So cutting that fight out in order to give more fight between Courneya and Pablo doesn't make any sense. It's also not the focus of the series because the series isn't about people punching each other. The series is about how the automatons play against each other, right? So like knowing what your series is about, knowing what the themes of your series is about is incredibly important for knowing how to do one-shot correctly. And even with that said, it's still very, very hard. One-shots are very, very hard to do properly. Now, normally I wouldn't do this, but because of the fact I'm interested in this contest, I can talk a little bit about how the series develops. I could just scroll down and actually show you the outlines for the other chapters, but I'm not going to do that because I've not looked over those, and like I don't spoilers. I don't want like this will eventually be turned into a one shot and be read for free somewhere. I don't know. I need an artist for this still. So if you're an artist, hit me up. And if you're an artist and you don't want this series, I have tons of other series in my portfolio. I'll link my portfolio below. Go look at my portfolio. Draw things for me, please. That'd be great. I take basically any skill level is appreciated for one shots. For more long-term series, if you're a particular shonen battle artist, hit me up because that's my main genre that I write, and I need someone to work with on like a more long-running series that actually gets serialized eventually. So like, cool. So this series from here, the next chapter is like primarily about meeting Dixit. Dixit not necessarily wanting to be an engineer for these two random dudes, but them like slowly convincing him through their own determination and showing that they're very similar, that Pablo and Dixit are very similar in the ways they go about things. Dixit is essentially a character that lives in a scrapyard. He works there, and he's just been spending his life slowly putting together this robot out of scrap metal that he's just pulled out of the ground, the little things he's managed to get together. And that's where the name comes from, essentially. And very important to see the distinction between Dixit and Pablo and see the similarities between the two of them, because of the fact Dixit is about like slowly building this thing over time and then having this explosive final push. And Pablo is very much the same thing. It's about slowly building your body, slowly building your mind as a fighter, and then having that explosive final push in the actual ring itself. Showing that parallel between what a mechanic does and what a boxer does. I just said boxer. Sorry, like usually when I think about this type of series, I'm used to it being a boxing series and not like a mixed martial arts series, right? And this is like essentially a mixed martial arts. There are different like brackets, and different brackets will have different rulings. I think that's even on this page. No. It is actually on this page. It's at the very bottom. Yeah, different styles of robots for different brackets. So different brackets are going to have different rules and different things and different types of robots. Some robots might have weapons, some might not. I'm not too worried about that because I'm mostly focusing right now for the first volume of this story. So the first 10 chapters, that's what I have outlined. That's really what I'm interested in doing. Could go beyond that, obviously, if I want to explore other avenues. But right now, just like the first 10 chapters for the first volume, I think is really what I care about doing for this story at the moment. And obviously, it's going to be about them having this beat up, terrible robot called the Scrapper, made of literal scrap metal that the main character is going to have to pilot. It's not going to like work perfectly in each of the tournament fights, and he's going to have to get through the tournament fights. The robot's going to have to somehow be kept together. Pablo's going to have to actually learn a proper fighting style from his coach, and they're going to have to make it through this tournament in like one piece and actually win it, or else there's going to be this huge debt problem the main character is going to have to face. And essentially, like, they have debt, they're done. Like, they need money for both to get a real robot and also to not be in crippling debt. Both of these things are important. You need money to live? Oh, joke's on you. I don't need anything. Writing is my subsistence. And of course, eventually, it's going to culminate together in a final rematch between Pablo and the rival character, who's not named yet, because I'm not very good at names. It takes me a while to actually come up with names properly. Although the names I have here, I'm happy with. Pablo, good name, very just like solid generic name, but good enough. Courneya is a African name. I forget what region of Africa it's from, but it's an African name. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. If I want, Dixit, I think is a really good name. Scrapper's a really good name. Forge is also a really good name. Boom, bada bing, bada boom. If this story had 20 more pages, or even like 27 more pages, I don't know exactly how the one shot would change. Maybe a little bit more. I wouldn't show the fight between Courneya or Pablo either way. I probably would show the fight between Pablo and the random grunts who are piloting automatons themselves. Probably show a little bit more of Pablo's like life, showing maybe like where he lives, maybe showing a little bit more Courneya and how they like go about their day-to-day, show like how their lives are different before meeting. It's real hard to do because you don't want to push forward in the story, right? Because pushing forward, you're now adding new elements to it. It's no longer a tight, focused one shot. It's now like kind of, what's the word? It's more so going into like, here's just the first 3 chapters rather than here's the first chapter, right? And you can do a one shot that way. I might even prefer to do one shots that way. I don't like kind of think about that, but that's like would go against what the one shot currently is. In fact, I just scrolled down and looked at the outline for chapter 3 and I already knew the outline for chapter 2, but looking at the outline for chapter 3, which is the start of the tournament, and also the first signs of like the automaton not working correctly and the fighter not working correctly, and like having had all 3 characters like pull things together in order to like overcome the challenge from them, that very much could work. It would take a reworking of the first chapter, but that could work. I don't think it would necessarily be better for sure, but it could definitely work that way. Again, like, I don't actually see a problem. I think there's probably other writers that see a problem with like having the first one shot essentially just be the first 3 chapters and not just like one self-contained story. But I don't think it matters too much. I think it's cool either way, fam. That's Scrapyard Rising at the moment. That's where we're at. It might take me a while to actually find an artist for the series because of the fact, again, people don't generally like drawing automatons. Although the first chapter are like fairly like high-tech automatons, so they're not exactly going to be like harder to draw. In fact, I don't even really necessarily get it being harder. Like you look at a Gundam design, right? And that seems like a bunch of very solid shapings that you can work with. But I don't know. I'm not an artist. I don't know how art works. If you're artist, hit me up. If you're the person voting on whether or not this story wins, vote for this. Because I just like winning competitions. I actually enter stories into random competitions sometimes. And I usually win. So that's cool. That's cool. I like that. Thank you for watching this. I don't know. I'm definitely going to think about how I can like analyze scripts and see the best way to like get things out of them. Usually the thing I would do normally is just like write a bunch of scripts and be like, oh yes, I learned this thing here and I can make a video about that specific thing. Actually going over the scripts themselves. There's probably a way to make that an interesting, good content. I just have to figure that one out, champ. I'm going to end the video here because this is like already going on for a while. I don't want to go on for that long because I don't want to spend time editing this. Thank you. Subscribe, I guess, buy my books, or you can read my manga that I actually have available. I have a manga called Creators available that you can read free, and I have a manga that's currently being published week by week called My Little Depression Goddess Can't Be This Cute. Creators is a shonen slice of life comedy. Depression Goddess is a just like purely 4-comma comedy. If either of those sound interesting, you can read them free. I could have 3 novel series, a battle shonen series called Wizard's Path, a isekai light novel hard magic series called Icarus Reborn, and a supernatural mystery occult detective series called Oddity Specialist. If any of those sound interesting, you can check them out. All of them are for $4.99. And if you don't have money to spend, you might be able to actually like sign up for a review copy eventually here. And you can just do that by reading the book. If you're willing to leave an honest Amazon review afterwards, or if you have like a YouTube channel or like a blog, you can also sign up for a thing and just like make a blog post or make a video on it. And that's a way you can get a book for free. So if you want to do that, you can do that as well. Thank you for watching. Bye. Also, I forgot to mention you can actually view this in my portfolio down below in the description right now if you want.